Everybody, I'm to the Muntz. We're from Health-ISAC, where we'll be presenting on diagnosing the hurdles of the medical device regulatory landscape. We'll be mostly looking at the US and the EU's of their regulatory guidelines. Just to go over what is an ISAC. An ISAC is an information sharing analysis center. So we empower sharing and collaboration in critical infrastructure. So there's different ISACs. We are the health sector, and then there's also a water ISAC, the ISAC, a bunch of different ones. So Health-ISAC is a community of 10,000 plus global security analysts built on trust and community. We focus on different areas, not only the healthcare providers, but the medical device manufacturers. We're even going into that's incentives, looking at that.
Great. And so for this talk, it is diagnosing the hurdles in the medical device regulatory landscape. And a lot of those hurdles, this talk is going to focus on AI integration and how AI integration standards are kind of making the process of getting medical devices approved, or just R&D in general across the board in some global countries a bit more complicated. So to start off, AI is used in medical devices right now to analyze medical images. They can help streamline diagnoses and kind of prepare patients for treatment quicker. It's really useful in monitoring with wearable stuff like Fitbits or Apple Watch, some of these wearable devices. AI can kind of populate that data into more actionable insights. And then arguably one of the first use cases after with LLMs in healthcare delivery environments, like in hospital clinics, taking notes during patient physician consultations. So that way that patient has some notes you can refer them to. So the risk of AI in medical devices, like every new disruptive technology, there is some risk that goes along with implementing it. So for AI specifically in medical devices, data quality bias. So the AI is not biased. It has the bias of whatever the training data is. And because it's a mathematical model at the end of the day, it will reflect that same bias that it has in its training data set. Regulatory challenges, which we'll explore a little deeper in this presentation, kind of how different regions around the world standardize AI use and how device manufacturers will have to navigate different standards of use and become and maintain their global presence. Cybersecurity of medical devices with AI, including data loss prevention, some DLP concerns, if the data implemented into the AI is not secured properly. Protected health information privacy concerns. So by integrating AI, you're also opening up the space for which health information is being transferred. Therefore, your PHI landscape is a bit widened. And then ethical implications. So as we'll see later on in the presentation, some blocks of countries around the world have these ethical standards for AI use, and because health information is so sensitive, ethical concerns play a major part of development. So moving on, this is a hypothetical attack. It has to deal with poisoning of images. So kind of introduce us a little bit where AI image classification. So these models that will identify what an image is, they can be poisoned. So this is an example of a model that's a degradation attack because you're degrading the effectiveness of the model by cleaning these distorted pixels, which are called noise images. That plus 0.07x is actually a mathematical function done on the pixels of the original panda. And some of the research that have come out of universities that they've actually been able to create these noise images to create a specific desired outcome. So for this one, it was given, and then for the bottom one, it was ostrich. So you can kind of get these predetermined outcomes based on how you arrange your pixels. So what does that mean for healthcare? Basically, with medical imaging, we do these imaging devices for diagnoses. Hypothetically, if these devices, this comes into that data bias we were talking about earlier. If a threat actor were to poison the training data of medical AI with these noise images, stuff like this could occur, which really implements the need for human oversight in AI development. Because this is an example of an AI hallucination, which is where the AI's result is factually incorrect. And this has been a persistent problem even with newer models being released by ChatGPT, by Google, by Microsoft. Sure. So this is a problem that's still persisting in some of the new models like OpenAI's GPT 4.5 or Google's Gemma 3, their open source series of models. No matter how advanced it gets, it seems these problems still persist. So the need for humans to validate, trust but verify, that's the saying. It's definitely rings true with AI, and then especially when you're adopting it into devices, especially medical devices that deal with sensitive information, that human element is still very much needed. So AI does not replace humans; it just kind of acts as a tool to empower them. Now,
So for the legislation on AI and medical devices, as I said, we'll be focusing on the United States and as well as EU. For the European Union, they do have some AI acts. And then for specific countries by themselves, like Spain has really led the medical device security landscape with their own regulations. So for the United States, for medical devices specifically, we're going to be looking at primarily the pre-market submissions, as well as a 510K, which will allow a device to be marketed in the market. So the FDA has been authorizing more AI devices every year since 1995 to 2024. There's been 950 AI in medical devices approved. The chart just did that on the line because the data is not complete, but it is going to continue to rise. So for the pre-market submissions, there's a lot of draft guidances and guidances that the FDA has released to help manufacturers get those devices approved. One of those is the considerations for use of artificial intelligence to support regulatory decision-making for drug and biological products. The main thing with medical devices is that patient safety aspect. So when looking at the cybersecurity of a device, we have to consider patient safety as rather than just the vulnerability, we have to include that patient safety aspect. There's also the AI and ML software as a medical device action plan the FDA has released, as well as the draft guidance on artificial intelligence enabled device software functions, lifecycle management, and marketing submission. This is going to be from your pre-market from your development to your end of life. It's going to encompass those recommendations, as well as a risk management document. And then for other AI regulations within the United States, previously the Biden administration had implemented an executive order, it was Executive Order 14110 regarding the uses of AI, and that was mostly what federal agencies had to maintain for the use of AI. However, the executive order recently by Trump repealed that executive order, so agencies don't have to consider that anymore, as well as just managing risk and considerations for the FDA, that draft guide, as well as the post-market updates.
So the European Union introduced a first on the global stage, where they were the first organization to release a comprehensive use case of what was an acceptable use of AI. They classified the uses of AI into 4 categories. They had unacceptable risk, high risk, here we got it. Yep. Unacceptable risk, high risk, limited risk, and minimum risk. So these were the 4 categories that AI use was developed. And this affects not only medical devices as they are high risk applications, but just generally all other innovators that seek to do business in the European Union. And this was pretty monumental because regardless of where the provider or the developer of the AI system was located, they had to adhere to the development standards that corresponded to the category of their product. So if, for example, at Health-ISAC, we have a lot of medical device manufacturers and healthcare delivery organizations, and the AI boosted products in the healthcare sector are considered high risk. So there's a lot of regulatory changes that they're going to need to accommodate. And as Taylor was mentioning earlier with the executive orders in AI, there was a summit in Paris where a lot of global leaders met to discuss what the development of AI meant in their countries. And there was two schools of thought during that conference that kind of shone through. There was the making sure we secure and develop these ethical frameworks before we develop AI. And then there was the innovation where we need to just innovate that we can regulate after the fact to maintain a competitive edge. So the reasoning for transitioning from those executive orders off of United States companies, where United States-based companies do not have to adhere to ethical use as much as EU companies do, because the European Union is kind of like in charge in this ethical use of AI. So it's going to create quite the dynamic for organizations that do business in the US and the EU and abroad, because there are going to be two different mentalities regarding innovation at play. You're going to have to somehow navigate the ethical use that is persistent prioritizing the European Union and the innovative use case that is prioritized in the US. And because the medical devices are classified as high risk, they have to undergo conformity assessments for compliance, and there's a lot of supply chain auditing involved in this process. So here are some obligations that are required for high-risk systems. They need to have technical documentation, so documentation of how your system works exactly, transparency and provision of information to developers, to deployers. This talks about kind of more of these SBOMs, these transparency of what went into your device, quality management system, making sure you have good QA, because it's going to be used in a high-risk application. Making sure you have good QA is definitely a high priority. Having an incident reporting apparatus readily available, so if something does happen, it will be remediated. Conformity assessments, this is going to make sure that your development lifecycle and your system itself adhere to the regulations at play. Post-market monitoring procedures to make sure that they maintain compliance. And then AI literacy, making sure your company has a baseline in ethical use of AI systems. So some standardization challenges. Here we have the pyramid where we have our 4 tiers of AI use. We have the unacceptable risk, which is prohibited. These include some facial recognition, these AI large-scale social engineering. So like a pretty common use case of this would be how they have a social credit system in China and other countries around the world. We're using AI for involuntary facial recognition. That would be considered an unacceptable risk of AI and therefore a prohibited use case. The high risk where the healthcare system and the health sector operates, this is going to where you need to have that conformity assessment. This is where you're going to need to have your risk management, some of that heightened transparency, data governance, and then lastly, human oversight. So dealing with these high risk requirements while also maintaining a competitive edge as this EU AI Act becomes enforced, this could lead to bottlenecks in development as you're trying to push out products that push the curve while also maintaining to these new ethical standards. Whereas maybe competitors that just have a US-based company won't have to go through that same regulatory oversight. They will have a smaller market, but their innovation curve may be slightly steeper because they don't have to engage in the compliance measures. That would lead to some bottlenecks in development, so R&D could slow down until that framework is established. And then, so some impacts as medical device manufacturers and other device manufacturers, and honestly, any innovators really. Ensuring local compliance is going to take a significant amount of overhead. You're going to have to probably allocate some resources to making sure that your R&D centers are aware of these legislations and are also aware of building infrastructure to make sure that you are compliant as these legislations allow. The EU AI Act, while it's a great baseline, it is likely that it's going to be built upon. And there's also legislation similar to it in the Asia Pacific region as well. Longer lead time, so this is more of that when you're diverting resources to making sure to maintain local compliance, may lead to a decrease in operational output, especially on the R&D side of things, where you're trying to develop new products. Some initiatives may be stalled until they can meet local compliance. Increased costs, that's that resource allocation we're talking about. Establishing regulatory teams, and then some compliance regulations may overlap. This is actually a good thing because multiple global compliance regulations have emerged out of this EU AI Act with similar acts to follow. If you can find a way to navigate the same problem that's persistent across multiple countries, and making sure you have transparency, making sure you have that human oversight element, figuring out common denominators can be a way to streamline compliance efforts.
And specifically for the United States, manufacturers will have to comply with both the HIPAA security rule, which is the 524B, and it'll include also with the proposed HIPAA security rule addition. They will also have to comply with that, which will include timelines for patching, timelines for risk management, which will have to occur on a more regular basis between 6 months to a year, rather than whenever you come out with a patch. And those are also the FDA oversight once again with that pre-market submission, the 5 to 10K, and then the guidance documents available in 8 submissions, which will help get those devices approved in time.
Then for companies operating in the EU, you must comply with medical device regulation, additional data privacy regulations such as the GDPR, and its extra requirements like having data guardian, similar goals. Also, EU companies will have to comply with the EU AI Act, as we covered earlier. Really some of that strict compliance with that risk management and data governance. And also you are required to set up reporting systems. And even if you're not an EU specific company, if you are trying to do business in the European Union or you're trying to expand globally, proactive measures to try to come up with those frameworks and compliance might be a good way to streamline that process.
And overall, just globally, you're going to have to conform to different regions' AI regulations. So currently, there is regulations with the United States, EU, UK, Singapore, China, Brazil, just to name a few, or Australia specifically, which isn't on this list. But the Therapeutic Goods Administration is controls that regulation. And then just leveraging opportunities to expand into other markets with compliance. We're going to have to take a look at some of these documents, but as we said, there's a lot of overlaps. Because the main goal is patient safety at the end of the day. And then just some recommendations. So what manufacturers are applicable is going to be any of those that are located or they distributed within the region that apply to specific regulations. So if you're a manufacturer within the United States, you're going to have to apply US regulations, but if you're marketing towards the European Union, you're also going to have to make sure you're compliant with those regulations, which means you'll have some vary with end devices, which is why some devices will be available in the EU, but not available in the United States or vice versa. And then just some tips to for the evolving landscape, just ensure your AI system is transparent, which means like what data is coming in, because we don't want any biases, or ensuring that the device is cyber secure, complying with the existing laws, and continuing to adapt to those changes. As the United States continues to add regulations and recommendations, we're going to have to take those into account, as well as the EU once the EU AI does become applicable to a lot of different corporations. Regularly audit the AI system for bias, because if you're continuously putting in, for example, like we're trying to diagnose a patient, but we're continuously putting in other information into the AI model, it could obscure that diagnosis and give that patient the wrong outcome. We're going to have to keep the records of the data that's used to train the system to make sure it's kept up to date, and then engage in industry collaboration.
Bring AI into medical devices is honestly anything. It comes with a little bit of risk. It could be a double-edged sword where there is going to be a significant boost of productivity whenever the device is, but at that same cost, if I implement a disruptive technology and some of these things that we're still very much on the research curve of, there could be some unknown risks that we don't know yet. There could also be supply chain risks for AI, including training data. Maybe there's something in that training data that will cause it to have a bias that is not productive, or the AI itself may hallucinate and produce false outputs. Each region will probably have their own regulations and that the manufacturers offer must comply with. So, as Taylor was mentioning before, so it's not just the EU, it's also China. It's also the APAC region, Singapore, it's global. So there may be this regulatory landscape that while certain global regions have their standardization and baselines, those baselines may be different, which is gonna really make that regulatory landscape a little bit tumultuous or it's even. And navigating that may be a challenge up on the horizon. And then finally, yeah, kind of those unknown unknowns. So there are some known risks about AI right now. There's also a lot of stuff that we don't know about AI right now. And that could lead to risks that come up on the horizon. So it's definitely a cat and mouse game, but by proactively mitigating threats that are on the horizon, organizations can kind of smooth themselves into the transition instead of being reactionary when this needs to be compliant. And so if you're already preparing for compliance and you're preparing for the EU AI Act and some of this forward-facing research, you'll already have some stuff in place before those deadlines are being set by those regulators. And with that being said, I'll pass it over to Q&A. Anyone have any questions for us?
I guess we can practice. I know it's like leading through.
You were mentioning medical devices specifically. I'm curious how this would also translate to things like insurance companies. We've seen a lot of the around claims. Do these acts apply to insurance companies?
So these acts apply to a lot of stuff. And I think they're going to apply to all AI systems, but I think the best way to answer your question is that what categorization of risk does it fall under? So I think medical devices, just because they are accessing directly on protected health information, so some of those like biometric readings from the watch, stuff like that, they may have a higher regulatory requirement because they're classified as a high risk. If an insurance artificial intelligence system is also operating on protected health information, so it's somehow looking at the procedures you receive, and I can see it also impacting being required to meet those high risk requirements. But if it's a system that's meant for maximizing efficiency in prices or generating protection plans, trying to figure out the best way to structure those, that may not be as sensitive. So these local regulations will likely apply to insurance applications, but at what level of risk will they be? And I think there could be multiple systems in an insurance company that operate at different levels. So you could have one that would be a sensitive AI-enabled system that looks at procedures, that looks at sensitive health information. Then you could have other ones that are just there to maximize efficiency that may not be as sensitive. And then those regulatory requirements may be different. So I hope that helps.
And then just to add that the security rules also going to come into play, specifically when it comes to data transferring.
Hey there, your example showed some different diagnostic tools, like for the skin cancer. Are there any industries that are really innovative about this, or who are doing security and innovations you can think of, or what comes to mind with who is ahead of?
I'm not sure who's ahead of it, but your bigger companies are going to have a lot more range in what they're able to do. The smaller companies obviously don't have those fundings. I believe Philips, even Siemens would have these tools integrating already, but for images specifically, you're going to be looking at a lot of icons and PAC systems.
Yeah. One last thing, those that are looking to see more information on what AI risks might be evolving. There's a couple of resources you can check out. The MITRE released the Atlas Matrix. So it's similar to their attack. It's the MITRE attack, but it's for AI and LLM enabled entities. So that's the tactics, techniques, and procedures used by threat actors that also use AI. I'd also encourage you to recommend the OWASP LLM Top 10 White Paper Series, where it talks about the top 10 issues, top 10 security issues with large language models on the OWASP Foundation. Thank you.
All right, at this point, it's probably a good time to give one more round of applause to Ethan and Will.